Hi, it's Penny here, and in this video I'm going to be wrapping up all the books that I read in the month of February. Now in February I read 24 things, even though it was a shorter month, although admittedly 13 of those were graphic novel type things, but they still count. And as usual, I am going to be wrapping up these books book battle style, which means I pair up all the books, I battle them against each other until we come up with the best book of the month. So for our first battle, we're going to do all my kind of Western fantasy books that I read. So we have The Alloy of Law by Brandon Sanderson, up against Red Country by Joe Abercrombie, up against Fate of the Argosi by Sebastien de Castell. So firstly, The Alloy of Law. This is the first book in Mistborn Era 2, which follows on from the original Mistborn trilogy, but enough time has passed that those original events are now kind of like mythology or religion. But you can also tell, even though it's not mentioned much, you can tell that the memory of those events has been changed slightly over time. And as well, even though the magic is still based on people consuming metals and gaining different abilities depending on the metal, things about the magic have also progressed. And I really liked the new ways that Brandon Sanderson is playing with these powers. And as I said, this is set in like a Western type world, so now we also have like bullets and guns impacting the way that these different powers are used. Like honestly, the way that he developed the magic, I really liked that part. What I was a little bit let down on was just the length of this. I think it was only about 300 pages, which for Brandon Sanderson is very short. And to me, it almost felt like a novella, like there's so many things that were introduced that we didn't really get enough into. And also in a lot of ways, the plot seemed fairly basic. Basically, we're following Waximilium. Is that his name? I think so. Who is a lawkeeper out in the Wild West, but then he actually has a family in the nobility, and after some deaths in his family, he's gone back to be a lord, where, to be honest, he's quite bored. So when these thieves turn up doing these train heists that are seemingly impossible, he gets involved in the investigation. And I did enjoy the investigation. It is like very clever, as you would expect from Brandon Sanderson. But as well, I just think because we hadn't had much of a chance to explore the world, a lot of the investigations just felt more like the reader being told that things would be possible rather than like learning about it and being able to put it together yourself. And I really did find it strange that even though some characters end up getting kidnapped, there's no real sense of urgency around saving them. And just like in general, the whole book feels like not very emotional, and I found it really hard to get connected to the characters, possibly because a lot of the characters are very like logical and calm themselves. So I think I can see why a lot of people don't like Era 2 as much as Era 1, but Alloy of Law was a good first taste of it, and I'm interested to see what else he'll do in the quartet. Then we have Red Country by Joe Abercrombie. So this is the third standalone in the First Law world. So basically we have the First Law trilogy, then we have 3 more standalones. People always refer to them as standalones, and you can read them as standalones, but I really don't think you'll enjoy them as much if you read them out of order, because every story does kind of link in to the bigger world events, and I really feel like we're being set up for the final trilogy in this world. After this one, I still have another short story anthology to go before I can read that final trilogy, but I am very hopeful for that final trilogy. I will say Red Country wasn't my favorite standalone. So in this one, basically we're following a young woman and her uncle, stepfather. They come back from town and discover that their farm has been burnt to the ground and someone has taken away the children. So then they head into the west to try and save these children, and out in the west of the world is basically this gold rush western style thing happening. And of course it's Joe Abercrombie, so he writes it in a very dark and gritty way, but it's also still very humorous at the same time. And I do still think Joe Abercrombie has some lines that just so capture the essence of life, even if sometimes it's a very negative perspective of life. They're just such great lines. So I did think this one still had all of that. I didn't think the plot was as good in this one, and like, plot is generally not Joe Abercrombie's strength, or even possibly what he's trying to do with these books, I don't know. But it wasn't really until the very ending that things started connecting into the bigger world, and that's when I got interested. So I did find the ending set things up in a way that I definitely still want to continue, but for most of the book, again, I just didn't feel that invested in what was happening. And there's even that character that I said that we knew from before, like I was expecting when I realized that that's what's happening. And I did like the way that that was done. Like it was kind of said without saying that that's who the character was, and it was done so well. But then what we got of that character just wasn't really that satisfying. Wasn't what I would have hoped to get from having that character back in the story. And I will admit that going into this, I was hesitant about it being a Western, but I actually don't necessarily think it was the Western aspect that made me not like this. It was the lack of a plot. Then I read The Fate of the Argosi by Sebastien de Castell. So this is a prequel series to the Spellslinger series, giving us the backstory of one of the characters, Furious Parfax, who's basically this nomadic philosopher. In the Spellslinger series, she's basically mentoring Kellen, the main character. And in this, we're learning about how she became the person that she is. I really love the first two books in this series. Like every book in this series and the other series has a new magic system in it, and I really love that creativity. And in the first two books, things were quite dark and emotional. I didn't feel like this third book somehow managed to be as dark and emotional, even though the focus of this third book is basically the Marek people who have been chased off and killed off for generations. So basically the topic of this book is genocide, and that's not something you would think wouldn't have some level of emotional depth. And to some degree, I did think it dealt with the topic with some complexity, but also I just didn't think it was deep enough. This is a new release, so they released it knowing that there would be a lot of parallels drawn between this book and what's going on in Palestine. And there was just like, there's solutions provided in this book that I just found quite unsatisfying, even though like I can see that it tried to explain why in this specific situation it might still be maybe not a good solution, but the best solution you could get. But I don't think it talked enough about the problems with the solution. And just I think as well, in the first two books, Furious Parfax herself is going through a lot of really traumatic experiences, where in this third book, even though she is of the people who are being genocided, is that the word? Anyway, she is of those people, but she's still somewhat emotionally disconnected from what's happening, and so it didn't have that same emotional depth. I can definitely see as well that some people would probably find this really slow because there is a lot of internal monologue, but most of that internal monologue is this Argosi philosophy. So Furious Parfax is one of the Argosi, and they have this very specific way of living life and kind of these different arts, they call them, that they use to navigate the world. And I really love learning more about that philosophy. But in the end, I do think this third book, even though I still liked it, it wasn't at the level of the first two books, and so overall it made me a bit disappointed for the series. As well, as far as I can tell, this is just going to be a trilogy, but it kind of seems like there's still a long way for Furious to go before she becomes the person, or before she gets to mentoring Kellen in the Spellslinger series. And so I don't really know what's happened to the rest of the story. Why am I not getting it? So if I'm putting these three books up against each other, I think first we'll take away Red Country because I just wasn't that invested in it. And then if I have to compare Fate of the Argosi with Alloy of Law, even though I just criticised Fate of the Argosi for not having enough depth, in some ways it still had more depth than Alloy of Law. And I do think I kind of like the tone of the writing better in Fate of the Argosi, even though Alloy of Law is maybe cleverer, although there is a fair amount of clevereness in Fate of the Argosi. I think I'm going to pick Fate of the Argosi. I don't think that's what I was expecting, but that's what we're going to pick. And I actually think, I want to say, you can read the Argosi series without picking up the Spellslinger series. The Spellslinger series, I think, is like 6 or 7 books, and I think people think they can't read this Argosi series until they've read that. But I also think a lot of people would like the Argosi series better, and I think you could read it first. I don't think it would matter which order you read these series in. So if it sounds at all interesting to you, then do give it a go. You don't have to read the Spellslinger series. Okay, then we're going to have a battle that's purely Olivie Blake. So we have Masters of Death by Olivie Blake up against The Atlas Complex by Olivie Blake. So I read a lot of Olivie Blake in February. Oh, 2. That's not that many, right? Firstly, I picked up Masters of Death. I mainly picked this up because I got this for free from a little free library, and I was super excited because it's a fairly new release in good condition. Well, until I took it to the beach and I creased the corner, but That's me. Anyway, this one on the back kind of sells itself as a story about a vampire real estate agent going to this medium to get help with this haunted house that she's trying to sell. And kind of that is what the story is about, but actually it's more of a story about this guy named Fox, who is the godson of death and also the medium that helps out with the haunted house. And it's about his relationship with his godfather, as well as kind of this romantic relationship he has with this Nordic demigod. And there is also this game. So it does say at the top of the synopsis, there is a game that the immortals play. There is only one rule: don't lose. So it's also a lot about this game, which I think really is just a chance for Olivie Blake to really get into the philosophy and the analysis of emotions that she really enjoys to do. Honestly, I'm very conflicted about this book. In some ways, I really loved it. It's really creative in the way that it's written, and I love so many of the ideas that it explores in terms of like the meaning of life and death and like other worlds that might be out there. But I also kind of feel like it was badly written. Like there's just very little structure, or the structure is very incomprehensible. The dialogue in here is just painful. The way that the characters talk to each other, it's just trying so hard to be clever, and it just gets really tiring and made me dislike all the characters in some way, even though in other ways I really liked them. Like, I don't know. I feel like this had a lot of potential, and I almost feel like anything I would say about how it should be improved would take away from some of the things that I really liked about it. So like, I don't know, like I kind of liked it, but I also don't think a lot of people will like this. And I worry that if I reread this, I wouldn't like it, because a lot of the enjoyment is just in the discovery of what's going on and like reading about the ideas. Anyway, that was that one. And then I read The Atlas Complex. So that's the third and final book in the Atlas series by Olivie Blake. This is the one that was a breakout success and where Olivie Blake's career really started going. I know a lot of people are disappointed in this third book, and that is me included, even though I don't really like the first two books that much. Like I thought they were fine. But at least the first two books had like a typical plot structure going, and you could kind of follow the plot, and the way that the characters were interacting with each other really made you feel like you were reading a story. So in this one, basically we've got these 6 students in this world where magic is kind of a normal thing. These 6 students are incredibly powerful, and they get accepted into the Society of Alexandria, where they have access to the Library of Alexandria. But the idea is that after the first year, only 5 of them are going to make it to the next year, and the other one is going to have to die. So, high stakes. And there were some really clever things in the plot in the first 2. Did it pull off everything it tried to? Not really. Then in the third book, is there really a plot? Kind of. They're kind of trying to do this magical experiment that is kind of part of a scheme of another character, but does any of that matter? Not really. Once again, Olivie Blake's just trying to write a story about the emotions and the angst of the characters, and again, a lot of ideas in there about the meaning of life and death and other worlds, like very similar to Masters of Death in terms of the themes and ideas that it's looking at. But overall, I just found it really frustrating to read, because I felt like if it just had a bit more structure, it actually could have explored these different ideas better, and it could have developed the characters a lot better. It might have been because I listened to all these books on audiobook, and I think maybe they'd be read physically, but also I just, once again, maybe don't think it was that well written. There will of course be people who love this, but I think most people will be frustrated by the lack of structure. So if I'm putting these 2 books up against each other, I am going to pick Masters of Death. I just thought this was much more creative, but it might also be just that this explored ideas that I was more interested in a way that I was more interested in. Or it could also just be that I read this one physically. Anyway, Masters of Death. We'll go through it in the next round. Okay then, I think when I put together these brackets for the book battle, I had a plan for why I grouped these ones together, but I don't remember what it was anymore. But anyway, we have Game Changer by Neal Shusterman, up against This Other World by A.C. Buchanan, up against books 1 to 4 of Alcatraz versus the Evil Librarians by Brandon Sanderson. So firstly, let's talk about Game Changer by Neal Shusterman. I mostly picked this one up because it was on special for $2 and it deals with multiverse stuff. So in this one, basically we're following this football player, and he gets whacked on the head and then starts slipping through to different multiverses. And to be honest, I DNF'd this one at 50%. I just think for me, it felt a lot like White Male Privilege 101. Like, I liked the idea of using the multiverse to look at different kinds of privilege, but at 50%, everything that it had gotten into just felt like too basic in the way that it was dealing with it. Like, definitely, I think that some people could get something out of this book, but for me, I was just bored. The main character is just the most stereotypical white guy. So boring. I didn't care about any of it. The way that the multiverse stuff was being dealt with was also like just really boring. When I'm reading about multiverse stuff, I want it to have details and deal with like all the messes or the twistiness that multiverse stuff can cause, or that can cause multiverses. Anyway, this just dealt with the multiverse stuff in a very convenient and vague way and was more a story about different kinds of privilege. I did look up a summary of what the rest of the story was going to be about, and like, I don't necessarily think it was bad. I think it probably does look at privilege in a really interesting way, but I was just so bored. I couldn't do it. Like, mostly this is just a football player hanging out with his friends. Sometimes things are a bit different than he remembered them, but mostly he's not doing anything interesting, and I was bored. Then I picked up This Other World by A.C. Buchanan, mainly because I needed an ebook while I was away on holiday, and I knew I really liked this one, but also I keep telling people this is really good, but I'd kind of forgotten it because it had been so long since I read it. So I picked it up again, and I am really glad. I really enjoyed my reread, although since it's a reread, it's not eligible to win the battle. So this story is about like an older autistic woman, and A.C. Buchanan, who also writes under Andy Buchanan. I think maybe their sci-fi stuff they try to put under A.C. Buchanan. I'm not really sure, but anyway, they're autistic, so this is own voices. And so this woman basically lives on this alien planet and has a relationship with this alien. It's a very stable relationship, which I enjoyed. And she feels very at home in the culture on this alien planet. However, there then ends up being a bit of a war between these two areas. Oh, and as well, on this planet, there's kind of this thing that when you get older, you join this like communal consciousness. And then after this war starts, there starts being these weird like psychic links kind of happening that everyone's very confused about. And our main character ends up investigating it a little bit. And like with Fate of the Argosi, I think that conflict was definitely something where you could draw a lot of parallels to things that are going on in the world currently. Although this was written in 2016, so it's not recent, but you know, the world's been terrible for a long time. But I really like the way that the story dealt with it. The only thing I would say is because this is really short little novella type thing, I just think there were so many more ideas that could have been explored, and I wish it had been longer so we could have gotten more of that. But I still also thought the story was quite satisfying, and I definitely still recommend it. Then I'm actually at the moment reading the whole Alcatraz versus the Evil Librarians series, but as I'm filming, I've read the first 4. There's kind of 5 books and then another 6 books, so kind of 6 books. And this is following this boy named Alcatraz, who's an orphan, and then when he turns 13, he gets sent this bag of sand from his parents saying this is your inheritance, which seems very strange. But then his grandfather turns up and tells him all about this other part of the world. Actually, there's a map in here. So this is kind of a map of our world. There's Africa. Wait, Penny, that's South America. Anyway, the main thing about this map to note is New Zealand is there. Also, there's all these other countries kind of in between in the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. And basically, the idea in this world is that the librarians are keeping all these other countries secret from the rest of the world. So throughout the series, we're learning about these other parts of the world and also why Alcatraz was left in our part of the world. And we're also learning about kind of the magic or the technology. So they have these glasses that certain people can wear, and the glasses, depending on the sands they're made of, will have different abilities. There's also people who have talents. The talents mostly seem like completely useless things, like one person's talent is that they wake up ugly in the morning, or another person's talent is that they're always late. So like things that seem really useless, but in the plot, they end up being used in such clever ways. It's actually very similar to The Alloy of Law by Brandon Sanderson. Like the way that he uses the different magical abilities, sometimes it's just genius. And just in general, these are very clever. They're also very humorous, and because humor is subjective, I think some people find this a bit too much. I was afraid going into this series because I haven't liked some of Brandon Sanderson's more sillier works. Even though I had read the first book in this series before, I was still afraid that I would go back to it and I would hate it. But actually, I have been really enjoying the series. Like the first 4 books so far, they've just been a lot of fun. Maybe not mind-blowing, but a lot of fun, very clever, and I'll be interested to see how the series wraps up. So, if I'm putting these 3 books in a series up against each other, I guess we're going to first take away Game Changer because I DNF'd it, so it doesn't deserve to win. Part of me thinks I should also take away This Other World because it's a reread, it can't win anyway, but also I think it deserves to win, probably just because I'm more the target market for that kind of book than I am for a silly kids book. So yeah, I'm going to put This Other World through to the next round. Okay, then let's get into the graphic novels that I read. Firstly, we're going to do the ones that are have a cutesy element and are more like of a serial type nature. So we've got The Promised Neverland Volume 9 to 14 by Kaiu, Shirai and Posuka Demizu, up against The Cursed Princess Club Volumes 1 to 4 by LambCat, up against Claudia and the Bad Joke by Arley Nopra. So, The Promised Neverland is a 20-book manga series, and in the month of February I managed to get all the way from 9 to 14, which I think is pretty good progress, and I've only got 6 more to go. So in this one we follow a bunch of really cute and really smart orphans, but they realize that something is off about their orphanage. They realize it's not safe and that they need to escape. So they start kind of scheming about how they're going to do that. And they do, after a little while, actually manage to escape, and we learn a lot more about the world outside the orphanage. So I will say at the end of January, I read some volumes, I think like 6, 7, and 8, and I really enjoyed those. It felt like the series was finally making progress again, because after the first few, I felt like we got stuck for a couple. Then I felt like it got going again, but then I felt like it got stuck again. And there were a few bits within this series, like between 9 and 14, where I thought, oh, there's a new thing coming, it's going to be really cool. Then we got stuck again. Like, I just felt like we kept getting stuck because of the serial nature of the way that manga are often released originally, kind of each chapter at a time. Because of that, it just felt like it was constantly repeating what had just happened. And right at the beginning of the series, I compared it to Death Note because I felt like that logical battle of wits was what we were going for. But after the first few books, I feel like a lot of the logic doesn't really feel sound, and it doesn't necessarily feel like as clever as it did. And there was a part in volume 6, 7, and 8 where we got some new characters and I was super excited. Then 9 to 14, we got so many new characters that I just got overwhelmed. I couldn't keep track of them. A lot of them are drawn somewhat similarly, and I just found it kind of confusing, and nothing in the plot has quite gone in the direction that I wanted to. Also, right in volume 14, oh actually I think 13, there was a time jump, and then 14, we get a character from earlier come back and we discover everything that's been happening with them, and that plot sounded way more interesting than what we'd actually been following along with. So then I just felt like I'd been missing out on the interesting plot. So I've only got 6 volumes to go. I am going to continue this series and finish it off, but am I loving it? Not really, not really. But that does really contrast with the next one. So The Cursed Princess Club. This is actually a webtoon that my sister recommended to me, although it is now being made into books. I think the first 3 volumes have been released and volume 4 is coming soon, but I read the whole thing on my phone, and I have talked a lot about not enjoying reading things on my phone, but I enjoyed reading this on my phone. Maybe it's because it's a graphic type thing. I don't know. But this starts out just as a really cutesy story. We have the 3 princesses from the Pastel Kingdom, and there is an arranged marriage for them to marry the 3 princes of the Plaid Kingdom. But while the first 2 princesses are very classically beautiful, like the first one has birds doing her hair and she sings beautifully, the second one just like grows flowers all around her. And so the first 2 princes are very happy with the arranged marriage, but the third princess has like kind of dull green skin and green hair that's not quite as beautiful, or not as stereotypically beautiful as her older sisters, and she has like this pet possum that sometimes is just like gnawing on her head, and the third prince is really not happy with what he's got. And then at some point also, the third princess stumbles into the forest and comes across this cursed princess club where there are a bunch of princesses that have different curses, and they just form this amazing friendship. And just the way that every single character in this series develops so much. We learn so much about all of them, and I grew to care about all of them. There's all these different plot threads going on, and the way that they came together, especially at the end, the way that things came together was mind-blowing for me. Tiny details from the beginning like came back to really mean something in the end, and the ending was super satisfying. And like throughout the series, it is still very silly. There's a lot of like just silly jokes, but I loved all of those jokes. I laughed out loud so many times, and I ended up loving this. I will say, like, when I first picked it up, the art style wasn't really my favorite kind of art style, and I wasn't sure I was going to like it. But I do think throughout the series, the art got a little bit better, and maybe I just got used to it. Also, I really loved the way that it would represent characters being shocked, because, like, all the time, characters being blindsided by new information, or, like, just awful things are happening to them, and the way that their reactions were drawn. Perfect. I rated every volume higher and higher until the fourth volume just gets 5 stars because I loved it. And I'm super sad that I've finished it now, and I will probably go back and reread the whole thing whenever I'm sad. I definitely think it will have that readability factor because so many small details from the beginning ended up meaning so much in the end. When you reread it, you'll be able to pick up and understand the significance of those things right from the beginning. Honestly, so good. And it's free online, so you've really got no excuse for at least trying it. Like, I didn't necessarily think that I would like it. This was a recommendation from my sister, so shout out to my sister. But I didn't necessarily think that I would love this, but I did. I really did. Then I also read Claudia and the Bad Joke. So this is a Babysitter's Club graphic novel adaptation. So the Babysitter's Club books were books that I read when I was a young kid, and I learned so much from them. We're basically just following this group of babysitters as they learn about life, babysit some kids, have some fun. In this one, basically there's this pranking trend that's really going around the town, and babysitters end up babysitting this girl who's really obsessed with pranking, and then when she pulls a prank on Claudia, Claudia ends up breaking her leg. So the story doesn't really do anything too complex. It's just a story about someone breaking their leg and questioning whether they should make some life changes based on that. But for me, these are just always really nostalgic. I do think my memory of the original book was that it went into a lot more details of what it was like to break your leg, and like the whole thing of getting a cast put on, and then what happens when you get the cast taken off. Which obviously it's a lot easier to get into all those details in book form. But I do think, like, for this one, the graphic novel adaptation probably doesn't have the same level of lesson or the same level of learning that the original did. But it was still really fun. The art in these is always really cute. I will say this is a new artist. They've been changing the adapters quite often in this series for some reason. This was a new artist, and I think you could tell there were some times where certain panels just felt a little bit inconsistent, but then there were also some panels that were really beautiful and really well done, so it was fine. I had a really fun time being back with the Babysitter's Club. I always do. Okay, quick insert from editing me because I forgot to do the battle for these 3 books, but I think that's because it just kind of seemed obvious that it was going to be the Cursed Princess Club. Also though, I wanted an excuse to add what I didn't say is just how many wholesome lessons there are in the Cursed Princess Club. Like, there's so many good messages. Like, I just cannot state enough that I really love this. So, Cursed Princess Club, through to the next round. Back to past me. Okay, then lastly, we have a couple of graphic novels that I got from the library. These are the ones that are a little bit darker than the others. So we have The Night Eaters, Book 2, Her Little Reapers by Marjorie and Sana Takeda. Up against I Hate Fairyland Volume 5, Gert's Inferno by Skottie and Brett Bean. So firstly, The Night Eaters. This is a really hard one to talk about without getting into spoilers. But basically, in the first book, we had these 2 twins who are running a restaurant. But this book series was written during COVID times. I think that's when they actually created it. So since they're struggling a bit, their parents come back. I think their parents are from China, but also Hawaii. I always forget. Anyway, their parents come back to help out, and then the mother decides that these twins aren't tough enough, and she gets them involved with dealing with this haunted house that's across the street from where they live. And in the first book, we also got a lot of the backstory of the mother and father and how they first got together. And a little bit more about them. In the second book, we're learning a lot more about the magic and the supernatural elements of the world, and I really enjoyed learning about it, although I will admit a lot of the time I was super confused, which is kind of similar to how I felt about the Monstrous series by Marjorie and Takeda. So I do wonder if on a reread it'll make more sense, like I experienced with the Monstrous series. But also in this one it kind of makes sense because, you know, we're mostly getting the twins' perspective and they're also just learning about things and very confused by things. I will also say it has kind of quite a rough art style, but I do think it kind of suited the story. And there were some parts in here that are just like horrifying, like this page, awful. And just like there's murder, there's blood, there's gore, there's creepy dolls. But I really enjoy this. Like, it's really twisted, but I really enjoyed it. I love how dark and awful it is. But also, like, the twins are just like normal young adults trying to live their life while now also having this supernatural element in their life. I really love this. Then as well, I picked up volume 5 of the I Hate Fairyland series. In the first volume, we basically follow this young girl named Gert. Actually, I think there's a picture in here retelling it. Maybe not. But anyway, basically when Gert was a young girl, she was sucked through a portal into Fairyland, and the idea is that it would be very easy for her to find the key and go back through the door into the normal world. But she ended up being there for like 27 years, and by the time all that time has gone past, she's just become very violent. She can't die, but she's just going around this really cutesy fairyland and destroying things and just creating complete carnage. And the art is always like just really beautiful, bright colors, so that kind of contrasts with the darkness of what's happening, but goes really well with the cutesiness of it all. I love the combination. But in this one, so basically in the previous books, Gert did manage to get back to the human world, and in this one, she's basically sucking at life in the normal world. So when an opportunity comes to go back to Fairyland, she's going to take it. Although most of this book is not set in Fairyland, because she has to go on a bit of a journey through other places to get there. But it is still really graphic and gory and twisted, but also like bright and cute. I will admit that some of the chapters felt like pretty plotless, just like kind of filler material. In fact, in some ways this whole book felt like filler material, but it was still really fun. I had a good time with it. Still, if I'm going to put these two up against each other, we are going to go with the Night Eaters because it's just so dark and twisted. I loved it. Okay, now we're going to do a little bit of a semi-final battle. Firstly, let's pick the best novel of the month. So we're going to have Fate of the Argosi by Sebastien de Castell up against Masters of Death by Olivie Blake, up against This Other World by A.C. Buchanan. So I think of these three, firstly we're going to take away Masters of Death just because it wasn't as well written as the others. And then, as I said, This Other World isn't allowed to win the book battle, so I think it's ineligible at the semi-final stage. So that means we're going to be left with Fate of the Argosi as the best book of the month. And I know I criticized it in some ways, but I still did really like it. I wish it had been just a little bit better to live up to the first two books in the trilogy, but it was still good. Then we have The Cursed Princess Club by LambCat up against The Night Eaters Book 2, Her Little Reapers by Marjorie and Takeda. I really liked both of these, but I think you can tell by the amount that I raved about it that I just love The Cursed Princess Club so much. There's just no way I can't pick The Cursed Princess Club to go through to the finals. Best graphic novel I have read in February, but also possibly this year. I can't see many things topping it. It was just great. So actually then, we're up to the finals. We're going to have The Fate of the Argosi by Sebastien de Castell up against The Cursed Princess Club by LambCat. And you know what I'm going to pick? I'm going to pick The Cursed Princess Club. This is so unexpected. Like, I never would have guessed at the beginning of the month that this is what I would be in love with, but I really am. Like, please, if it sounds at all interesting to you, pick up The Cursed Princess Club. Just give it a go. And do Discuss with me down in the comments if you've read any of the other books that I've talked about in this video. I would love to chat with you. And do subscribe if you would like to see more of my bookish videos. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.